really poor, and they depend on the state government even for salaries, even for maintenance. If you look at the US, ma'am, they have got local option income tax, local option sell tax, gasoline tax. In fact, see, there are a range of municipal revenues. So in our Indian federalism, since that it has got a strong center, for example, land, for example, as a land as a tax base. In most countries, you find land belongs to the local tax, local base. But here you see capital gains on land is under the income tax. Transfer taxes are with the state government. Municipalities have got property tax. Then vacant land tax or the land value tax, which was a major tax in the developed countries when they urbanized, I think it is not there. So therefore, from the state government, I find until and unless we have reforms in the fiscal federalism, which Mrs. Ahluwalia committee has recommended, I think the solution, if we are not thinking of an alternative other than octroi, I think the only solution to have a constitutional sharing in the GST, which Ahluwalia committee has recommended. The problem is one of finance and of course governance, that is a major issue like capacity building. These are the 2 points I find that states are have to depend quite a lot on reforms which can be spearheaded by the national government. Thank you.
One take.
Well, I thought what was just said by Mr. Ramchandran provoked me just to sort of respond. The two separate issues. One is really the question of why in government thinking and planning, why is it that the urban areas don't figure? I think that's a very legitimate, correct statement actually. If you go back, and I think this is probably mentioned somewhere in the book, that if you go back into Indian plan documents, I mean, in the early days, there was generally rather a regret about urbanization. And the fact that all these fellows are coming and putting a lot of burden on urban services, and somehow we should prevent that. I mean, it's not that different from what the Chinese did, except they were successfully able to prevent it for a while. We, of course, are not able to prevent it, but we kept hoping that somehow we can do something so that they don't come in. And this was totally wrong, and a complete failure to understand that the economics of a modern economy and agglomeration and all that sort of stuff means that you're going to have urbanization. Whether you have metropolitanization is another issue. I mean, truly this country needs another 20 cities. But how we're going to get that is not very clear. However, it is true that it's only probably in the last two plans that all deputy chairmen feel that all wisdom has dawned only on the plans that they've been associated with. But I have a suspicion that this is actually technically also true. The recognition that, look, the urban sector is there. You know, lots of people love this, politicians love the phrase, it's taken from Mahatma Gandhi, I think, that India lives in its villages. But you know, Gandhiji said that in 1930s, when in terms of percentages of population, he was vastly more correct. And he was also known that, you know, to say that when circumstances change, he changes his mind. So it's quite clear that if the population is getting to be 40, and some people claim that the population of the census is understated, so by 2030 is going to be much more than 40. There is some little bit of fiddling on whether the urban people get properly represented, so they don't actually get as many seats as they should. But there's no doubt that politicians are seeing the change, and some of what you see in the press is a reflection of the fact that, you know, the urban voice in popular discourse and political discourse is rising. So I think that change is actually going to take place. Now, the more difficult question is, everybody talks about silos and why can't we do anything about it? I don't have a good answer to that. It is more true than you think, and I think you can tell us from your own experience. It may be less true in the states, I don't know, because I think the states are run in a presidential system. So really, historically, the central government, even when it's been run by a single party, has been run much more where ministries have very substantial independent role in policy, technical expertise, this, that, and the other. In the states, all states are run in a presidential system. So it may be, this is an important question, that whereas at the central level the silo thing is very significant, it may be less so in a state if a chief minister is determined to overcome that problem. But the real problem in the states is that everything to do with the city is actually decided by the central government, not by the city itself. I think Mohanty talked about the fact that metropolitan areas really don't have any control over taxation. Now, mind you, their credibility in demanding control is much less because their ability to implement simple recovery of operation and maintenance charges is very poor. But that too is because I think it's not actually decided by them. So frankly, the municipal bodies simply have never been given any responsibility, and it's not surprising that they are simply an Oliver asks for more kind of culture. I mean, whenever something is needed, they either ask the state government or they ask the central government. I think this whole strategy of financing urban development by the central government providing money and state governments passing it on, and this is not really the way a really healthy urban industrial urbanization and service delivery is going to take place. So something has to change.
Well, on that note, I'm happy to say it's now 1 o'clock. So we end the second session. Lunch is served in the other half of this room behind the partition. So please refresh yourselves and join in for lunch. We get back at 2 o'clock to start with our governance and finance session, which is where Paul Smoke will be the principal speaker and initiating the discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are now starting the third session. I would request Dr. Mohanty to please chair the session and set the theme for the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanushree. This session is devoted to finance and governance, and Professor Paul Smoke will be the main speaker, followed by Mr. Gajendra Haldia from the Planning Commission. We all say that cities are the engines of growth and structural transformation. In economics, cities are homes to two powerful externalities that economists have ever discovered: agglomeration externalities and knowledge externalities. These externalities translates into the tax bases of government. They accrue to all the levels of the government. But because of fiscal federalism, there is a imbalance between the functions of the local bodies and their finances. Our cities, they suffer from a rich city, poor city government syndrome, and the various papers, they focus primarily on urban public finance and fiscal federalism. Cities, they create external benefits to many actors in the economy. Apart from taxes, users pay, beneficiaries pay, polluters pay, congestors pay, exacerbators pay, and growth pays. There are many principles of local public finance that cities provide opportunity to harness. However, Indian cities, because of various problems, we have not been able to harness, make our cities vibrant, and our municipal finance, it constitutes only 0.8 to 9% of the GDP, which is one of the lowest in the world. Even countries like Brazil, South Africa, they have all got more than 5%. With this, I would request Professor Paul Smoke to deliver his address. Professor Paul Smoke is not new. when India started the Constitution 74th Amendment Act, 92, Professor Paul Smoke came at the invitation of the Ministry of Urban Development to assist in the research works relating to fiscal federalism. I would request Professor Paul Smoke to come here and deliver his address. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this occasion. I should say at the start that my own background, even though I have been teaching in urban planning programs for 25 years, I am more a public finance person. So the way that I think about the world is embedded in public finance theory and the fiscal federalism theory that Dr. Mohanty has just referred to. The second thing I'll say is, although it is true that I was here a few in the 1990s to talk about some ideas around the constitutional amendment, I'm not an Indian expert, and I'm not going to make prescriptions. I see my role this afternoon as mentioning a few things that strike me about the chapters in this volume, but mostly talking about how I see them as relating to global experience, and in particular, the need for additional work on matters which often are not taken into adequate consideration. So I'll start by saying that the thing that I think is very striking to me about this volume is that it does attempt to integrate things which are normally treated very separately and as technical matters. So the urban planning issues, the finance issues, the social inclusion issues and engagement with citizens and so forth. It seems that we have suffered, I think, both in the real policy world and in academia, from a fragmentation of dealing with these issues, which are very important for the success of urban areas. So I guess that also means that perhaps some of the things that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, there seem to be a lot of urban planners here, maybe aren't that familiar to people. I'm going to make a few comments, and then we'll see what questions you have later. So the theory of public finance for intergovernmental fiscal relations in general and for urban areas was built around this notion of fiscal federalism that Dr. Mohanty referred to. And it is a theory that tries to explain from an economic efficiency perspective the best way of allocating functions and revenue sources among levels of government. This is the fundamental role of fiscal federalism. And most of the chapters in this volume take that as a starting point. So in Dr. Mohanty's own chapter, he uses some of the fiscal federalism principles to outline what he sees as a more sound way of thinking about the division of functions among levels of government in India and also revenues. And he makes the case also for tax increment financing and other land-based taxes. So I think it's a very sound set of principles. This is built on in the chapter by Jessica Seddon, in which she develops the notion of market worthiness. And her premise is that the kinds of things that urban local bodies need to be able to do, as outlined in Dr. Mohanty's paper,